All right, so today we are going to take a deep dive into Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None.
Ooh, very
Yeah, one
exciting.
of the classics. 10 strangers,
Yes.
a shady past, a remote island, and, well, a killer on the loose.
Each with a dark secret beckoned to this island under false pretenses.
And it all starts with invitations from this mysterious Mr. and Mrs. Owen,
Right. Exactly.
drawing our characters to the very isolated Soldier Island. So who are some of these guests that we meet?
Well, we meet Justice Wargrave, a retired judge, of course, with a reputation for being quite severe. Vera Claythorne, she's a young woman haunted by a past tragic accident.
Yeah.
And then we also meet Philip Lombard. He's quite adventurous, maybe a little shady.
So they all have a little bit of baggage they're bringing to the island.
Oh, absolutely. Each and every one of them.
Okay, so they're all lured to this island. What happens when they actually get there?
Well, upon arrival, they're greeted by the butler and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Rogers. They claim to be awaiting their employers, the Owens. But there's something not quite right.
Always a little unsettling when the host isn't there to greet you.
Absolutely. And to add to this unease, in each of the rooms, they find a framed nursery rhyme.
Oh.
10 little soldier boys. And the verses of this rhyme, they're a bit eerie because they depict the deaths of these soldiers one by one.
A nursery rhyme. That's creepy. Definitely not your typical island decor.
Certainly not. And if that wasn't strange enough, during their first dinner together, a recorded voice just booms out, accusing every single guest of being responsible for a past death.
What?
A death that escaped legal justice. And the accusations, they aren't vague, they're very specific, unveiling each guest's hidden guilt and turning what was a polite dinner into stunned silence. And then, of course, defensive outcries.
Yeah, that'll kill the mood pretty quick.
Absolutely.
So from polite introductions to accusations of murder.
Exactly.
I can only imagine the tension in that room.
It's palpable.
So does this all just stay as accusations? Or does something actually, does something happen?
Well, in Chapter 3, we see the first death. Young, reckless Anthony Marston.
Okay.
He chokes on his whiskey, and it turns out the whiskey was poisoned with cyanide. And his death, well, it eerily mirrors the first verse of that nursery rhyme. One choked his little self, and then there were 9.
Wow, so the nursery rhyme isn't just a decoration, it's a blueprint.
It appears so.
So one down, and I'm guessing the guests are starting to realize that they're not on just a simple vacation.
They are trapped with a murderer, and the fear is palpable. And it escalates because the deaths, they don't stop there.
Oh, no.
Mrs. Rogers is the next to go. She's found lifeless in her bed. Now, initially her death, it seemed natural, perhaps an overdose of sleeping medication. But the suspicion, it lingers.
So 2 gets down, 8 left. Still no way to contact the mainland.
Absolutely. Cut off and trapped with a killer. And as the story progresses, the isolation and fear, they just become these central themes. In Chapter 5, we have another death. This time it's General MacArthur, an older man carrying a lot of guilt from a past wartime decision.
Okay.
He almost seems to accept his fate, welcoming it almost. And later he's found dead on the beach, killed by a blow to the head.
It's like the killers working their way through the guests one by one. And with every death, another figure disappears from the dinner table. It's a constant visual reminder that time is running out.
Yes, a shrinking number of guests. And the tension keeps rising. Chapter 6 throws another wrench into the mix when Mr. Rogers is found dead, this time in the woodshed, killed with an axe while he was chopping wood.
So we're at 4 deaths now, and we still have no clear idea who the killer is or why they're doing this. What happens next?
Well, understandably, the remaining guests are trying to make sense of the chaos. They meticulously search the island, each other's belongings, looking for any clue that could lead them to the killer. They even go so far as to elect a leader, choosing the seemingly level-headed Justice Wargrave.
Oh, so they're trying to gain some control over the situation.
Exactly, but despite their efforts, the killings continue.
Oh, no.
Emily Brent, an elderly religious woman, becomes the 5th victim, injected with poison. She was just sitting alone in the dining room.
Wow. So halfway through the book, half of the guests are dead, and the fear and suspicion have just shattered any trust that they might have had in one another. What a terrifying situation.
It's a nightmare come to life. And it's only going to get worse for them because, as you can imagine, the situation is becoming increasingly desperate.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
The remaining guests realize how vulnerable they are, so they try to take some precautions. They lock away any potential weapons, and they just constantly watch each other's every move.
Makes sense.
Right.
I mean, at this point, you can't even trust your own shadow. But is all this enough to stop a killer who just seems to be one step ahead at every turn.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And in Chapter 8, things take another turn when Vera Claythorne, she's already on edge, and she gets startled by a seaweed arrangement in her room.
Seaweed?
Yeah, someone had made the seaweed arrangement, and she mistakes it for, some menacing presence.
Oh, geez. I could see how that would happen in this situation. Nerves are shot, everyone's paranoid.
Exactly. And though this incident might seem small, it really plays into the growing paranoia, and it sets the stage for yet another shocking death.
Oh, no. Not another one. So the killer isn't just using violence, but also psychological tactics.
It's a very clever and terrifying approach, isn't it?
Definitely.
So the others rush to Vera's aid when she cries out, and they find her safe but very shaken. And when they return downstairs, they're met with a truly chilling sight.
What did they see?
Justice Wargrave, sitting in his chair, dead.
The judge?
He appears to have been shot in the forehead.
Wow. So the judge, their leader, the symbol of authority, gone.
It really is as if the killer is mocking their attempts to fight back.
And I'm guessing this death also matches up with the nursery rhyme.
Oh, of course. It mirrors the sixth verse perfectly.
So their hope is dwindling. Who do they suspect next?
Well, at this point, they become convinced that Dr. Armstrong, the physician, he must be the killer.
The doctor.
They base their suspicions on his medical knowledge, right? And also his behavior after Wargrave's death, which they found a little odd.
Interesting. So the finger of suspicion is now pointing inward.
Yes, further fracturing the already fragile trust within the group.
So what happens with the doctor?
Well, their suspicions seem to be confirmed when Dr. Armstrong disappears during the night.
He vanishes.
Blore, Lombard, and Vera, they search frantically for him, but he's nowhere to be found. And they conclude that he must be the killer and he's staged his disappearance to throw them off his trail.
But they're wrong, right? Well, we still have a few guests left to go, according to the rhyme.
You're exactly right. The tension continues to build, and Blore, the former detective, becomes the next victim.
Oh, no. How does he die?
He's killed outside the house, crushed by a heavy, bear-shaped clock statue.
A clock statue.
It seems as though it was pushed from a window above.
Wow. Another death, another rhyme fulfilled. This killer is just relentless.
And now only Vera and Lombard are left. You can imagine their fear and desperation at this point.
Absolutely. It must be unbearable.
And to make matters worse, they discover Dr. Armstrong's body washed up on the shore.
So he wasn't the killer after all.
He was another victim.
Oh, wow. On the one hand, it must be a relief that he was innocent. But on the other hand, it means the real killer is still out there.
Hiding in plain sight. And Vera, overwhelmed by paranoia, she becomes convinced that Lombard is the killer.
Oh, no.
She makes a desperate move. She manages to steal his revolver, and she shoots him.
She shoots Lombard, believing that she's finally won this deadly game.
But as we know, there are no winners in this story. Vera's left alone on the island right, haunted by everything that has happened, all the death. And the weight of her actions, she goes back to her room, and she's drawn to this rope just hanging there, an eerie echo of that final line in the nursery rhyme. And in this delirious state, she hangs herself, fulfilling the prophecy.
So all 10 guests are dead, each death mirroring the nursery rhyme. It's a horrific scene, and when the police arrive, they're baffled. It seems like the perfect unsolvable crime.
Right, but that's what makes the ending so brilliant. Christie doesn't leave us hanging. She gives us answers. In a really unexpected way, a fisherman discovers a bottle. And inside is a confession, a manuscript written by none other than Justice Wargrave.
Wait a minute, Wargrave. But he was one of the victims. How is that possible?
This is pure Agatha Christie, right? Mastery of plotting, misdirection. In his confession, Wargrave reveals that he orchestrated the entire thing. He carefully chose each guest, each one guilty of a crime that had gone unpunished. He was driven by this twisted sense of justice, deciding to become judge, jury, and executioner. And he used the island as his stage for this meticulously planned series of murders.
So he was playing a double game the whole time, pretending to be a victim while manipulating everyone around him. That's devious.
Absolutely. And in his confession, he explains how he even enlisted Dr. Armstrong's help without the doctor even realizing it.
Wow.
He exploited Armstrong's ambition, his desire for recognition, and persuaded him to participate in a charade to make it look like Wargrave had been shot.
He basically used Armstrong's own personality against him.
Exactly. So once everyone thought he was dead, Wargrave was free to continue his plan, right? Eliminating the remaining guests one by one, leading up to Vera's manipulated suicide. And to top it all off, he made sure that his confession would be found, leaving behind this complete record of his twisted masterpiece. It's chilling. So in the end, Wargrave got what he wanted. He delivered his own brand of justice, making sure that every guest paid for their past. But it leaves us with a lot to think about.
Definitely. And then there were none. Is so much more than just a mystery. It's a real exploration of morality, guilt, and the dangers of unchecked power. Wargrave, even though he's fictional, forces us to ask ourselves some tough questions about justice, the line between what's right and what's revenge.
Yeah. Even when faced with terrible crimes, taking the law into your own hands, well, it can have devastating consequences. And it's fascinating how we can be both horrified by what Wargrave did and also kind of impressed by how he pulled it all off.
Hmm.
This book really makes you think about guilt, punishment, and the capacity for both good and evil that we all have inside us.